Hi, I'm Lily. I'm an anthropologist and user researcher working at the Digital Transformation. My partner in crime, who's meant to be speaking today, is right in the front row, Mira, who a few of you would know. She's managed to lose her voice, so I am the voice today. Be nice to her, she's pretty fragile. So today I am going to talk about what we have dramatically called the forgotten people. But as you'll soon see, the people who simply don't get the opportunity to participate in user research often enough. We want to highlight the importance of doing research with these people, about taking your team along for the ride, and give you some tips on how you can develop an inclusive product along the way. So first, a bit of context. So for the past just over a year, Mira and I have been working on the digital identity program at the DTA. Basically, the program is trying to develop a way in which you can prove your identity entirely online, so without having to go into a shop front like Service New South Wales or an AusPost to show you 100 points of ID. Now we're working with the Agile methodology, and I'll refer to this a couple of times, and we've been lucky to speak to over 400 people in the past year and a bit. We have been in this unique position where we're building a product that is literally for everyone in the country. And while that's a little bit daunting and a little bit exciting, it's opened up a lot of opportunity for us. So while this is pretty rare, especially in the government context, it's been a cool experience because we've had to think more broadly than we ever had before. So I'll go through some of the things that we've learnt along the way. You have to do the hard research first. How many researchers do we have in the room? A handful, 5, 6, cool. So for those who might not know, when you're doing user research in the Agile methodology, you'll likely research once a week or once a fortnight, whatever your sprint is. Each round of research, you'll have goals and hypotheses, and you'll recruit in a way that helps you explore what you're focusing on for that sprint. Some common ways of recruiting participants are through recruitment companies who, like Farron, as Lily mentioned before, who will provide you with individuals who match your requirements. There's also kind of guerrilla-style recruitment where you might basically walk up to someone on the street or in a cafe and ask for a couple of minutes of their time. There's also something like in context recruitment where you might interview someone who's waiting in line to access a service. Now, each different recruitment style has its own purpose, and a mix is actually required, because each has its pros and cons. And what we quickly realised when we were doing this project is that we needed to do quite targeted recruitment in order to speak to people who might not be on the research books or who might not be comfortable being interviewed in that other kind of ad hoc way. When building a product for everyone, we were building a product for everyone, and we realised that we can't really skimp on the everyone part. So we turned to community organisations, to charities, to advocacy groups who have established connections to their communities and who have specialist knowledge to help us with our research. We spoke to transgender individuals, new migrants and refugees, vulnerable young people, and remote Indigenous communities. We pushed hard for this research to be done so that we could speak to people who have vastly different levels of need, exposure, understanding, and experience with accessing government services. So why have we called it hard research? Because it's hard to do. It requires a lot of planning. It requires establishing relationships with organisations. It's often logistically difficult because community organisations aren't set up like Farron, like recruitment companies who will manage your times and your dates and your locations and your payments. And their sessions require complex ethical considerations. So why bother? Well, as you all know very well, you can't bake a muffin and push the blueberries in after it's done. I honestly think there needs to be a prize for whoever doesn't refer to blueberries and muffins today. If you consider, everyone knows this in the room, if you consider the diversity of experience and complexity of different individuals from the get-go, you will be building a better product. Now, as researchers, designers, developers, product managers, we all have a responsibility to do this, and I don't see it as a choice. So what do you do next? Get your team on board. In order to have the voices of the individuals you've just worked so hard to include in your research heard, you have to get your team to understand the value. It's an ongoing process. It happens simultaneously to doing the research. First thing we do at the DTA is get our team to come along and do research with us. So we have developers sit in the room seeing someone struggle through the prototype that they've just worked the past week to fix up. we've managed to get some of our policy writers to come along to research and hear the participants' horror stories face to face of people passed, from one application process to another without getting the support they need for the benefit that they so desperately need to apply for. In one of the sessions, one of our kind of head honcho policy guys came and sat in with me and was absolutely blown away at the complexity of the participants' identity documents, how many kind of discrepancies were on the documents. He had 1 million questions by the end. He told everyone else about it and referred back to that example multiple times in the future as we discussed what to do for people who had those discrepant documents. It seems so simple, but getting your team members to see something with their own eyes has more weight than your continual recounts of other people's experiences. It builds empathy, it builds compassion, and it builds care. Now, of course, it's not always possible to take everyone along with you while you do research. That's your job, not theirs. So we have a few other sessions locked into our sprints to make sure everyone's on the same page. We have sharebacks to present the findings of the research back to the team, and the team then have an opportunity to discuss as a group. We do this through our team, but we also have a specific one with the policy crew as well. Our policy crew, we expect a lot of them. They come along to all of the sessions. Sometimes they need a little bit of encouragement, but they're pretty good at coming, and so do management. And this is their way of kind of staying engaged with the products and seeing the continual iterations. This also helps us with the process of escalating important insights as well. One week we did research with legally blind individuals, each of whom had a visual impaired person's travel pass, which is a photo ID. Now, our policy team looks at all the different documents to determine which can help prove someone's identity. Documents like driver's license and passports are great, but they aren't accessible or needed for a number of people for a range of reasons. And as expected, none of our blind participants had a driver's license. So what our research did, and what the shareback did, was convince policy that it was worth getting the travel pass into the verification system. So those individuals were more likely to be able to prove their identity online if they wanted to. A more extreme example is when myself and another researcher, another anthropologist, spent 2 weeks out in remote Indigenous communities recently doing research with the Department of Human Services Remote Servicing Team, longest title in the world. So, in order to keep our team up to date while we were away for 2 weeks, and we wanted to keep the excitement, we wanted to keep the interest going. So what we did in order to share some of the amazing insights we were getting was upload daily vlogs. Now, at first they were a bit awkward because we're kind of doing this selfie vlog thing that we'd never done before. But as we went on, it became such a good way to explain what was going on each day and to explain the emotions that we were going through. And it really kept people on the journey with us. I do have an example. So this one is actually from Showcase, which is where kind of all the different DTA teams share what they've been doing for the past sprint. So this one is a little less personal than the ones that we sent to our direct team. But just to give you an idea of how easy it is to do.
We are from the identity team, and we are currently kind of in the middle of a 2-week discovery trip in remote communities in Northern Territory and Western Australia. So we've been flying around, we're exhausted and excited all at the same time, and have been learning lots.
And for those who couldn't see the screen, it's myself and Gillian sitting in kind of a dirty roadhouse bedroom against a concrete brick wall, looking a bit dishevelled and sweaty and dusty, basically just giving a recap of what we were doing. Okay, so at this point, you've got everyone caring about the human side of things. But there's one more step, right? You have to translate your juicy, valuable research into the wins for the user. So I'm going to give you examples of how we've done this. So with our vulnerable young people, we spoke to a number of people, all kind of from the one school, who were in a range of disadvantaged positions. Now, some were single mums with a couple of kids, some were teenagers who had left home and hadn't been in formal education since they were 10 or 11 years old. Some had behavioural issues and learning difficulties and really unstable homes. Now, there's a section of our prototype where your laptop camera comes on and you effectively take a picture of yourself, and that picture is then compared to the photo ID that you had uploaded or put the details in for before. Now, we thought young people, selfie, not going to be an issue. It actually didn't even cross our mind to think about it. Now, what we found out was that some of these young people had such low self-esteem they couldn't bear to see their own face on the computer screen, and that going through this part of the prototype was confronting and was uncomfortable. It was to the point where I was having to take the computer away from them and show them how to do it on myself so that I wasn't inflicting any kind of extra discomfort on them already. Now, this research, along with other weeks where people from all walks of life had, gotten a bit of a shock. It's like when you open the camera on your phone and it's facing you and you kind of get the big chin shot. Yeah, it's kind of like that for some people. So for some people, they haven't been through the international airport where you have to do you can do the smart gates and the face scan. And so this is really new. And like a few people have said, there's work to be done in creating trust in technology. And because this is fresh and this is new, it's still quite confronting for people. So, where am I? Okay. Yeah, so people were shocked to see themselves. And so what we did was we really stepped out the process, and we stepped out the pages before getting to the camera. While you can often aim to try and have as least clicks as possible to get, fly people through. For this, we really wanted to slow people down and to prepare them. So by the end, up until now, we have people fully prepared for what's going to happen. We have people saying, oh, okay, I think my camera's going to turn on when I click next, or, there's an understanding of what they're getting into rather than a rude shock. So yeah, you have to know and understand your users, and there's all different reasons why someone might have the same reaction. So this slide says, go back and retest your designs. Now, with this example, kind of wanted to highlight that actually we haven't gone back to those young, vulnerable people yet. We've worked with a whole lot of other people since that. It was close to a year ago that we did those interviews, and we've improved the product since then. So it's definitely on our to-do list, and because we need to test that what we know is now an improved experience, if that is enough, right? And if it's not enough for those people who really were quite averse to seeing their own face on screen, then there has to be something else built. We have to think of other options. Transgender individuals. So when we did research with the transgender individuals, we learned something that no one had even considered in our service design yet. The going in store for support might not be a viable option, and not because of distance or because of physical constraints, but because it's too emotionally challenging. We were told that the anxiety of going in store, face-to-face, to speak to someone they didn't know without any indication if the person was going to be accepting or understanding, or if the person behind them in the line was going to have any prejudices, was at times crippling. And it meant that people would either put off or, in some cases, not even apply for a service. We learned that there was more variation in this group than we expected, with some people wanting their documents to remain discrepant. So one person said, I want my birth certificate to say female, but my current driver's license says male, and I don't want to get rid of that history. I want that to be that. Whereas other people said, I want everything to be uniform, and I don't want to ever be referred to, the person I used to be. So we also learnt that the cost of changing one's name and one gender on all documents is often prohibitive, and can leave individuals in limbo for years, disrupting all of their identity proofing processes for government, for banking, and for employment. Now imagine dealing with this, and then having an online product built to save you from having to leave not only the comfort, but the safety of your own home, cheerily tell you, whoops, sorry, your case is too complex, you'll have to go in store to complete it. That's not what we're after. This research really made our team think twice about where we'd unknowingly accepted there would be dropout points, and is referred back to time and time again if anyone in our team gets complacent and says, well, they'll just have to go in store, it's all too hard. You have to consider all channels, but you must also be aware that not all channels are accessible for everyone. Now, this finding is accessible for many other, This finding is applicable for many other people as well, from those living remote who might live 2 days' drive from the closest shopfront, to those on the autism spectrum who are too overwhelmed to go into store, to those who have agoraphobia or feel unsafe going outside, or like we learnt from our vulnerable young people, those who simply don't have a lick of time to get to a shopfront because of work and school and kids. We now have our policy team madly working away to try and figure out how to successfully identify someone online when their documents do not necessarily align. A huge challenge. That's a good one for them. Now, we've also been playing with different ways to capture information. Do we ask someone for their name once up front, or do we ask it each time they enter the document details? For those with a uniform name across all of their documents, the first option is best. For those with discrepancies across their documents, first option sucks. There's so much to play with in this space, and doing this research opens up the opportunity to play with all of those things. New migrants and refugees. So what we learned here was how much variation exists within the experience of being a new migrant and refugee. And this alone has been great in breaking down people's assumptions about a group of people they might not have had the chance to meet before. On one hand, we had a young lady doing about 10 other people's government application forms because she had the best English and she was becoming a real whiz at dealing with the government. This helped our team to start to think about what the product and the experience looks like when someone else is helping an individual complete the flow. Sometimes your end user might not just be an individual user, so you have to think beyond that assumption. On the other hand, we had a teenager who was here on her own and did not have any access to a computer or internet at home and had to get to bus to the library in order to do anything on the computer. Now, this threw a big spanner in the works, one we knew about but needed a bit of a kick up the bum to focus on. How long do you set timeouts for? Do you make the timeout short to protect those on public computers? Or do you make them long so you don't kick someone out of the application who is simply taking their time because they've got dyslexia, English as a second language, or simply got distracted by a phone call or their crying kid? Now, I'm not going to lie, we haven't solved this one. If anyone has some hot tips, we'd love to hear it because it's a big, complex, serious design challenge. We also got a chance to speak to some of the caseworkers through the organisation who explained just how troubling predetermined secret questions can be for new migrants and refugees who come from diverse backgrounds. Questions like, what was the name of the street you first lived on, isn't terribly relevant for someone who grew up in a refugee camp. What is your mother's maiden name isn't great for cultures in which the naming conventions differ to our own. What was the name of your first pet is also totally irrelevant and potentially confusing for people from cultures where you don't own pets. I mean, how many times have you seen a secret question page like this that asks you to select from a list of questions rather than giving you the option to write your own? These powerful examples from our research were fed to our content writers who looked over their writing with a completely new lens. They also provide excellent evidence as we're moving forward for our managers to do continual research with people who have English as their second, their third, their fourth language. Okay, so finally, you're getting feedback from a range of people, you've got a team who are learning about diverse needs, and you've got a product that's well on its way to being sensitive and inclusive. You're doing pretty well. To sum up, I've got a few points for you to keep in mind when you're diving into the research. This is my absolute favourite one. You don't know what you don't know. If you haven't done the research, you haven't done the research. Even if individuals might not be your core users, there's so much variation in the human lived experience that speaking to what might be considered edge cases will only open your eyes to new ways of perceiving your product. You'll be surprised by insights and perspectives that you never would have thought about before. It's all about learning and it's only going to be positive. Minimal viable product, not minimal viable cohort. So with this one, no user is more important than another. When creating a minimal viable product, we're trying to release early and produce something that has sufficient functionality. The risk is that you rely solely on research from a minimal viable cohort. Well, there's no such thing. You should always be pushing the boundaries of who you do research with, to speak to those who wouldn't usually get a say, and to understand and explore the complexity of your product from the get-go. Now, I know it's not that easy. Things like budgets, travel, time, they all come into play. Ben explained that very well. But you have to push for it to happen. Use examples where it's benefited products before to help sway your manager or your team. Think about how to make it as cheap as possible. Get creative and brainstorm different methodology ideas. There's so much you can do online now. And couple research with other work trips that you're doing. Because no matter how good your methodology is, if you're not speaking to the right people, you're not building the right thing. Who you engage with throughout the development of your product is just as important as being a thorough, critical, open, and practiced researcher. It is your responsibility as the researcher and as the team around the researcher to keep everyone on their toes and to push them to think about the product from different perspectives. You can only do this if you're hearing those different perspectives yourself from real people and taking everyone along with you on that journey. Thanks.